She stood behind the cordon line for nearly 4 hours, helmet in hand, watching aircraft cycle through sorties she was qualified to lead. No one called her forward. No one even used her name. The mission manifest listed her as standby, though the slot had long since closed. And still, she waited silent, unreadable. Her flight gloves looped through her belt. Then a second alert was called. A system error no one could explain. The tower scrambled, the board reset, and a name reappeared. Not by request, not by rank, by necessity. And then everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The wind rolled low across the basin as Fob Artemis stirred to life in the early light. Dust hung in the air, rising in thin spirals between the taxi lines and sun-bleached blast walls. The desert hadn't cooled much overnight, and the heat shimmer had already begun to ripple over the concrete. Far to the west, a range of low ridges cast long shadows that would vanish by the hour mark. Inside the perimeter, maintenance crews moved between hardened shelters and open bays, their footsteps muffled by sand drift. At Pad 3, an A-10 Thunderbolt II sat motionless, tail number 812 stenciled in dull gray beneath a faded star. Its canopy reflected nothing but glare. The ground crew had checked it once, then moved on. Jessie stood just behind the left wing root, her gloves looped through her belt, clipboard angled against her thigh. Her flight suit was regulation olive, sleeves rolled tight, boots scrubbed of the previous week's mud. She moved through the pre-flight checks with practiced rhythm. Flap inspection, undercarriage integrity, ventral strake. She tapped a chaff port lightly with the back of her hand, then checked the arming lever and walked the full frame of the fuselage once more. No one was watching her. Not really. A junior airman offered a half-hearted thumbs up from a few bays over, then turned back to chat with a fueling tech leaning on a tug cart. Nearby, Mason's aircraft was already surrounded. His A-10 bore fresh nose art and a glossy panel finish that caught the light like polish. The crew there moved with visible urgency. One man held a tablet aloft while another adjusted a wing mount camera. Mason himself stood in the middle of it all, helmet tucked under one arm, offering clipped jokes that carried just loud enough to sound confident without trying too hard. Someone said his name, and a voice answered, already in control before wheels up. There was laughter, brief and practiced. Jessie said nothing. She clipped the checklist back to her belt and stepped toward the ladder. The cockpit interior smelled faintly of hot vinyl and gun oil. She slid into the seat, adjusted the harness with 3 precise tugs, and ran her eyes across the switches before reaching for the map pocket. Inside, her folded terrain reference sat creased and clean. A soft pencil line, underlining Bravo 9. She had marked it the night before, tracing the edge of the ridge corridor where heat distortion had been consistent over multiple sorties. On infrared, it would blend with background bloom. Easy place to stage a hide, if you were moving light convoys or scouting with pickup techs. She keyed up the link channel as Mason's voice crackled through. Copy ops stack. Flight lead green. Waiting on the filler. She toggled her transmit and replied, 2 is green and ready. Her tone was level, clipped, without friction. Mason's chuckle came back a second later. Just keeping the channel awake. No one else said anything. On the ramp, his crew began to clear. A few walked past Jessie's pad without acknowledgement. The mission brief had been routine. 2-ship CAS, south push over ridge sweep. Visual link with forward infantry team 6 clicks southeast of the basin mouth. Expected contact minimal. Potential for light armor escort but no air threat. Rules of engagement tight due to proximity of civilian agricultural zones. Altitude bands had been confirmed. Grid Bravo. 9 had appeared for less than a second during the screen flash, a courtesy more than a priority. Jessie had seen it. No one else had paused. Back in the cockpit, she ran the throttle calibration and gave a quiet breath. Her eyes tracked the ambient heat reading on the port panel. Rising already. She tapped a corner of her chart again. Bravo. 9 shimmered in her mind like a soft blur behind glass. Mason keyed the tower. Dagger flight requesting staggered release. I'll take lead at 3-0 interval. The tower confirmed without pause. Jessie closed the canopy. The hydraulic seal settled into place with a firm click. Sunlight washed across the glass in a pale arc. Her finger tapped the checklist once more before lift. 30 seconds later, Mason was airborne, wheels tucking and wings tilting smooth through the southern crosswind. His trail left a bright ripple against the cloudless sky. Jessie watched the vector data stabilize, then nudged her own throttle forward. As the nose lifted, her HUD flickered through 4 confirmation bands. No fanfare, no cheers, just weight, motion, and sky. From the command shack near the perimeter, one crew chief watched both aircraft disappear into the haze. "She's still flying backup?" he asked without looking away. Another shrugged and said, "Guess they needed the seat filled." Jessie climbed through the upper edge of the thermals, the ridges ahead casting their final shadows across the desert floor. Her eyes stayed steady. Her hand eased into trim. She flew quiet, clean, and low. Tail number 812 call sign, Dune Trace. On station and tracking. Inside the operations tent, the projector screen flickered between mission frames. A simulated sortie path curved across the display in red, the digital terrain shaded with elevation gradients and IR overlays. Mason stood at the front, pointer in hand, breezing through the briefing with the comfort of someone who knew he'd be followed. "We punch south, clear corridor Alpha to grid Delta 6, then swing wide and observe Bravo 9 on pass 2. Dune Trace will tail for secondary munitions, if needed." He tapped the screen again, highlighting a model A10 behind his own. The trailjet flickered for a moment, generic and unlabeled. Jessie recognized it instantly. It was her aircraft. Loaded into the simulation with placeholder logic, no name, no tail number, just a model to fill out formation. The air in the tent smelled of machine oil and coffee left too long on a burner. A few junior crew members stood against the back wall, watching. One leaned over to the other and said quietly, "That's the backup bird." "Right." His friend smirked and nodded. "Quiet one. She's still on paper. Strength only." Their voices never rose above conversational tone, but the intent was sharp enough to cut. Jessie sat 2 rows back, her helmet resting beside her, face unreadable. She didn't look at the screen, or at Mason. Her eyes were fixed on the corner of her folded map, the pencil mark under Bravo 9 still faintly visible. When the briefing wrapped, chairs scraped back with casual ease. Mason caught her eye briefly on the way out and offered a grin. "Just keep tight on my 6. You'll get a good view from there." She gave a neutral nod and didn't answer. Outside, the wind kicked up small streams of sand along the taxi lines. The heat was rising fast. On the pad, the aircraft shimmered against the hard light. Jessie climbed into hers with practiced care, her boots placing evenly on the ladder rungs. The fuselage was still warm from sun exposure. She eased into the cockpit, ran the startup checklist, and pressed her palm lightly across the top of the switch panel. The surfaces were worn smooth from repetition. Every toggle had been recalibrated to her hand. The markings were standard, but the sequence, the pacing of it, was hers, alone. Across the pad, Mason's crew moved with rehearsed energy. His helmet cam was being tested again. A comm-tech held a signal wand just outside the wing arc. Jessie caught the edge of their chatter over the intercom test channel. One voice said, "They still got her listed after she washed from JTAC." Another replied, "Optics. Man. They'll rotate her out after the next review cycle. She's not lead material." The reply carried a laugh, low and dismissive. Dune trace, someone added. Sounds like a call sign for an unmanned drone. Jessie adjusted her comm set and keyed the encryption tone. No reply was needed. She opened the terrain model again on her HUD and zoomed in on Bravo 9. The rendering was coarse, but the outline matched her earlier notes. She toggled to infrared overlay. The corridor read normal, but her pencil mark lingered in memory. She studied the elevation shift at the far edge of the ridgeline, too flat for natural terrain, possibly vehicle tamped, possibly ignored. The tower called for staggered takeoff. Mason's A-10 rolled first. His wheels lifted clean, his jet climbing with a shallow angle before banking southward. Engine note crisp through the headset. Jessie's launch was scheduled 30 seconds behind. A delay, not standard, but never questioned. She waited in silence. Canopy closed. The interior lit soft amber by morning light through the glass. The engine hum stabilized beneath her boots. She heard the same voices again, drifting from the edge of the pad. Always second out. Someone said, "Guess that's her ceiling." There was no malice, just rhythm remarks made by people convinced of the order of things. Her throttle eased forward. The aircraft moved smooth down the strip, tail stabilizers fluttering briefly in the headwind. She lifted clear just as Mason reached waypoint 1. No cheers from the ground, no glance from command, just vapor and ascent. From altitude, the base shrank to a cluster of fading rectangles. She slid into position behind Mason's vector, adjusted altitude band by 200 feet, and matched his speed within 0.1 of target. The system didn't announce it. The camera didn't pan. But Jessie's A-10 tail, number 812, call sign Dune trace, settled into formation with a steadiness no one tracked. Not yet. She looked down at the edge of the desert, the grid of Bravo 9 already sliding beneath her wing, and flew on. From altitude, the base shrank to a cluster of fading rectangles. She slid into position behind Mason's vector, adjusted altitude band by 200 feet, and matched his speed within 0.1 of target. The system didn't announce it. The camera didn't pan. But Jessie's A-10, tail, number 812, call sign, Dune trace, settled into formation with a steadiness no one tracked. Not yet. She looked down at the edge of the desert, the grid of Bravo 9 already sliding beneath her wing, and flew on. The second pass ran clean until Bravo 9. Jessie held position 500 feet behind Mason. Altitude matched within 5. Both aircraft sweeping south along the canyon mouth. The forward infantry unit had gone silent moments earlier, repositioning behind a defilade. Rock, face, no visuals from the drone team. Jessie toggled her terrain overlay again, the vector skimming the edge of her annotated route. She blinked against the sunlight. The shimmer was stronger now, heat bloom, stretched unnaturally across the grid, flattening texture into a single sheen. She keyed a private band. Lead, check IR on your left 10. Distortion drift just ahead of Canyon 3. Mason's reply came fast, almost casual. Copy. Probably a hot tire track. No time to detour. We'll burn through it. Her finger paused over the transmission switch. She didn't push it again. His A-10 rolled slightly, adjusted trim, and began his dive. Her eyes traced the vector line over the canyon shelf. Then everything snapped. From the edge of the ridge, a flash ignited a narrow cone of smoke trailing upward. Her HUD registered thermal spike. The manpad climbed faster than the tracking sensors could blink. Mason's bird flared hard. The explosion caught under his right wing root. The impact forced a twist, his airframe spinning in a half barrel before righting just long enough for the canopy to blow. The ejection flash was fast, followed by a narrow chute blooming midair. His A-10 tumbled, trailing smoke, then dropped behind a rise. Jessie's fingers gripped the stick, her throttle steady. Her eyes followed the chute as it drifted into the dead wash near a dry riverbed, dust scattering, then settling again. Mason's voice cracked over the comms, low and warped. Lead, Is out. Grid. His signal garbled and vanished. No confirmation. No reply. Her HUD blinked a soft tone. Locator ping received. The beacon from his ejection harness registered low altitude. No mobility. She toggled her vector south, dipped lower, and held orbit. Command broke in 3 seconds later. Dagger flight. Lead is confirmed ejected. CSR en route. Maintain altitude and RTB. You've done your part. She pressed her mic once, held it, then released. No response. Below, movement scattered along the edge of the basin. 2 pickup trucks, each mounted with makeshift gun platforms, peeled out from brush cover. Dust streamed behind their tires. They cut toward the shoot zone in a wide arc, heading straight for Mason's downed beacon. Jesse pressed zoom. One of the vehicles carried 3 armed militia, barely visible through the crosswind. No friendly units within 2 kilometers. She cycled her comms again. Visual on approaching contact to ejection site. No overwatch active. Do I have engagement clearance? Silence. Command answered a few seconds too late. Negative engagement. Maintain airframe integrity. CSR will resolve. Repeat RTB. Her eyes scanned the coordinates. The trucks were closing fast, too fast for the rescue bird to make it on time. No fire mission authorized, no clearance given, no one else in the sky. The echo of Mason's last call stayed in her ears. She pressed her left boot against the rudder and banked. No announcement, no call-out, no defiance. She simply turned. The A-10 dropped altitude in a steady roll. Throttle forward, flaps down. Terrain following mode engaged. Her hands moved in practiced sequence, steady as breath. The desert pressed upward, wind slicing past her canopy. Ridgelines narrowed. The canyon deepened. In the distance, her HUD tracked the militiamen with a soft orange box. No names, no flags, just signals. She leveled the aircraft, opened the targeting display, and toggled armament sequence. The GAU-8 loaded with high explosive rounds rattled once in confirmation. She didn't speak. The clouds above shifted, light bending through smoke as the sun dropped lower. A crosswind hit from the west. She adjusted pitch. Down below, the first pickup truck slid into position near the dry bank. One man jumped from the back, rifle raised. Her altitude read just under 150 feet. Command broke through again. Dagger flight. Confirm RTB. You are in denied airspace. Jesse did not reply. Her A-10 descended in a clean arc, hugging the canyon wall. She released countermeasures on instinct, the flare pods popping behind her like fireflies in heat haze. Dust kicked up from the canyon floor. One of the trucks fired upward blindly. Jesse adjusted bearing by 3 degrees and dropped lower. The ridgeline rose around her like a trap, but she held course. The beacon from Mason's harness blinked weakly on the lower left quadrant of her HUD. She armed the gun, held breath, and squeezed. The GAU-8 thundered beneath her. A half-second burst carved a line of impact between the vehicles and the chute. Dust and rock exploded in a line of separation. Not a kill run, just a message. Stay back. She banked again. Smoke trailing from the last flare burst. Her hands moved without hesitation. There were no cheers, no confirmations. The canyon swallowed the sound of her engines. Command fell quiet. She made one more pass. The second vehicle reversing course down a dry slope. Jesse tracked it briefly, marked its turn, then circled wide to screen the riverbed from the south. The chute was still visible, tangled against a slope. The signal blinked once, then again. Fuel dropped below the safety mark. Her left gauge flickered yellow. She checked time to rescue. Still too long. Jesse adjusted course again. Her hand stayed firm on the throttle. The system didn't announce her presence. She didn't need it to. She stayed. The canyon tightened as Jesse dropped back into the low terrain, her A-10 hugging the rock face with only meters to spare. She flew below radar sweep, throttled just high enough to maintain lift, the ridgeline pulling in around her like closing jaws. Thermal shadows rippled across her HUD, heat signatures distorted by swirling wind and late afternoon glare. The flare pods were primed. Her ammo count was flashing in the lower quadrant, a red arc near 0. But she was still flying. And that was enough. Her canopy vibrated with the pressure change as she skimmed past a limestone wall, wingtip nearly brushing the rock. She banked hard left, brought the aircraft around in a rising curve, then cut altitude again before leveling off. One truck had pushed closer to the crash zone, a technical with a mounted gun, masked in desert tarp and brush. It fired blind into the haze, each round flashing upward and arcing wide. She didn't flinch. She didn't reply. She looped behind the ridge and came in low, quiet, and fast. The GAU-8 roared beneath her, a short, controlled burst that stitched the dirt just ahead of the vehicle. Dust rose like a curtain, blinding the gunner. The truck jerked sideways, wheels slipping on loose gravel. It didn't reverse. It simply stopped. Jessie pulled back into a climb, rolled out over the basin, and dropped flares behind her in a staggered cross pattern. The last pod lit red before ignition. The heat trail sparked in the afternoon light, drawing away a second wave of fire that passed clean under her belly. She adjusted trim, flattened her path, and dove again. Below her, the riverbed sat shallow and broken. Mason's chute had collapsed fully, dragging across the slope. He wasn't visible, but the signal still blinked. She passed overhead once more, low and level, using her shadow to mask the chute from the northeast. The wind shifted. Visibility dipped. She keyed the channel. Dune trace to anyone on CSAR. Signal remains active. Hostile trucks still in motion. Ground not secure. Static answered. Then a voice breathless and partial. Black Hawk inbound. Unable to touch down. No clearance on Ridge LZ. Need ground smoke. Repeat. Need ground smoke. Jessie toggled her auxiliary bay. Reprogrammed the remaining smoke pods to burst pattern. She ran one more loop, flaring out wide before diving hard into the approach corridor. She dropped the pods one after another, spacing them along the slope in a curved sweep to block visibility from the eastern rise. Smoke billowed in dark ribbons, climbing fast in the hot air. Mason, half conscious beneath the scrub line, blinked against the dust. He couldn't see much beyond shapes and shadows, but he heard the thunder roll of the GU-8 and the shriek of wind across metal. He turned his head, just barely, and saw the undercarriage of the A-10 flash, once through the smoke, its silhouette sharp against the haze. Then it vanished again, low and away, the sound trailing like a promise. The Black Hawk hovered 2 ridges back, blades beating slow and wide. Ground clearance remained uncertain. The pilot circled, held, then circled again. Jessie could see them now, a flicker of dark frame just above the tree line. She swept past at full throttle, flaring again to keep the slope obscured. Her ammo gauge ticked lower, rounds remaining 27. She toggled the GAU-8 again, lined up for her final run, and targeted the far side of the canyon. The militia vehicles had stopped their advance but remained in visual proximity. She fired the last burst in a clean horizontal pattern across the slope, carving a trench that sent rock and dirt skyward. Not lethal, not provocative, but final. A line drawn. The system acknowledged the drop. The gun rattled empty. Her hands didn't shake. Her posture didn't change. Fuel ticked down to the red marker. 100.0 pounds over minimum return weight. The smoke thickened behind her. The canyon filled with haze and heat. The air trembled. Then the Black Hawk broke formation and descended. Jessie watched from altitude as the rotors kicked up grit along the slope. The crew worked fast. A winch dropped. A figure rose from the ground limp, but upright. Harness locked. Lift confirmed. The bird rose again, banking hard toward the fallback grid. Her HUD marked the extraction complete. Signal ended. No more beacons, no more targets, just fading terrain and the last of the heat bloom washing across the ridge. Command didn't speak. She didn't call in. Jessie turned her aircraft toward the return vector. Flaps adjusted manually, canopy streaked with a thin trace of smoke residue. Behind her, the canyon grew quiet again. No one else flew there. No one else had. The rescue team broke into view as the ridge swallowed the last of the sun. The Black Hawk's nose dipped into the haze, blades chewing through rising dust as it tracked the smoke plumes Jessie had left behind. The crew moved with hard precision. Side doors opened. The hoist team leaned out, eyes scanning for the beacon she'd held lit longer than her fuel allowed. The chute was tangled in scrubline just east of the wash. Mason was pinned near a shallow depression, half conscious. A streak of blood dried below one ear. The winch lowered. The harness locked. Mason's weight shifted as they lifted him up. Slow and clean. He didn't look around. Couldn't. But his audio still fed through his vest mic. Somewhere inside the Tactical Operations Center, a controller heard him whisper, "Still flying." She didn't leave. The line cut out. The signal blinked green. Medically stable. Extraction achieved. The body cam worn by the hoist operator caught it first. In the background, as the harness cleared the scrub, a shadow passed across the smoke line. The A-10 came in at treetop height, nose down, wings banking so low the outer edge clipped dust from the canyon shelf. No radio call, no flare, just the physical presence of metal in the sky, cutting through silence with 30,000 pounds of weight and will. In the talk, 3 screens flickered in sync. One showed the rescue telemetry. Another displayed the live feed from the hoist operator's vest. The third was drone overhead static interference, low angle, but enough to register the movement. An operator stepped closer, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes locked on the curve of the A-10 as it swung past again. "Is she still flying that cover pattern?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Another voice, older, clipped. From a controller at the adjacent station leaned closer to the waveform. "She never left the zone," he said. His tone wasn't surprised. It was just slow, like the words were finally catching up to what they'd all been seeing. On the far side of the room, a JTAC reviewed satellite lag footage of the smoke deployment sequence. He zoomed in, paused, then tapped the screen twice. That ridge cover wasn't random. She sequenced the drop, wrote the corridor for the bird to hover. One of the command staff asked, "Who authorized her to stay on station?" No one had an answer. A junior comms tech at the far end of the room raised her voice slightly. She didn't ask, just turned back. On screen, the A-10 passed again, slower now, her tail number barely visible through the static 812. Her call sign didn't need to be spoken. Everyone in the room saw it at once. "Dune trace," someone murmured. That was all. Down below, the Black Hawk began lift-out. Its blades pushed smoke in widening rings as the weight rose. Mason's figure tilted slightly in the harness, limp but stable. A flight medic reached through the door and locked him in with 2 quick pulls. The winch came back empty. The bird rose. Jessie held one final orbit. Her HUD showed minimum return fuel, systems cooling. Engine performance dropped by 5%. Cabin pressure warning steady but within limits. No alerts she hadn't seen before. She adjusted flaps manually, trimmed the wings flat, and flew one last pass. The A-10 cleared the smoke wall and banked wide to the west. Altitude steady, vector clean, no tower call, no exit phrase. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask. Inside the talk, the operator set his coffee down without drinking. He rewound the body cam feed and froze it mid-frame, Jessie's wings cutting through the dust line like a signature. The controller who'd first marked her return whispered again. She stayed for him. No one spoke against it. The overhead camera followed her shadow until it vanished behind the second ridge. After that, the canyon lay empty. The medevac reached altitude and veered toward the fallback grid, rotors pushing low cloud aside. Mason's vital signs stabilized. The flight medic looked up once, then back at the vitals pad. The silence left behind was the kind that came after a storm. Not absence, but aftermath. Presence, without noise. Back on base, hangar lights flickered on. The pads gleamed with old oil and fresh dust. Wind pushed across the open tarmac, soft and dry. No one was laughing now. The name that had been used like a placeholder dune trace carried weight none of them had given it before. On the mission board near the equipment bay, someone paused to adjust the listings. Her name stayed second, but now, someone had written it in permanent ink, and no one erased it. The sun had dipped low by the time Jessie's A-10 broke the ridge and began final approach. The runway shimmered in the heat that still clung to the concrete. Dust trailed behind her engines, curling into the violet dusk. Her gear locked with a heavy thud, and the tires touched down with a long, steady exhale of rubber and sand. No one said a word over comms. The tower issued a standard clearance, voice flat, routine. But the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was weight. She taxied slowly, her airframe dragging the day with it. Scorch marks streaked along the leading edge of the wings. The fuselage bore thin trails of soot where flares had ignited midair. Her engine cowling rattled once and settled. The nose dipped as she braked in front of the secondary revetment. Her canopy lifted with a soft mechanical groan, warm air escaping in a visible pulse. On the ground, crew had started to gather, pulled in by something quieter than orders. They stood behind tool carts and fuel trucks, saying nothing, hands still half filled with wrenches and radios. No one called her name. No one waved her down, but none of them moved away. Jessie climbed down the ladder in 3 even steps. Her gloves hung from her belt, untouched. Her boots hit the ground and left dark prints in the dust. She didn't stop to speak. She didn't remove her helmet. She walked past the gathered crew with the slow, grounded posture of someone whose body knew what the day had cost, even if she wouldn't say it. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the room was dim. Screens flickered in rows, each replaying mission feeds from multiple angles. Julian stood near the main table, arms folded, jaw tight. Mason sat propped on a stretcher just behind him, bandaged but alert. A faint line of dried blood still along his temple. His vest lay open. A medic hovered nearby, mostly ignored. The playback loop had been running for 20 minutes. It showed the Black Hawk hovering just above the slope, smoke curling past the rotors, and in the background, the unmistakable shape of an A-10 flying low enough to knock dust from the tree line. Someone had paused the footage mid-pass. The angle caught her aircraft full-frame tail number 812, descending like a wall. Mason tapped the edge of the monitor and said, almost to himself, "She came back." One of the younger officers glanced over from the log terminal and asked who was still flying over his chute. "That's not normal cover protocol." The JTAC from the forward team, just returned, stepped into the room and answered without hesitation. The one they said was just backup. Julian didn't reply right away. He looked at the paused image for a long time, then moved to the wall panel where flight assets were listed. The board had been updated hastily, dry erase notes crammed between scheduled sorties. He erased her name from the bottom line and rewrote it at the top. Under call sign Dune Trace, he marked her status priority air asset. Then he capped the pen and walked away. Jessie stepped through the outer corridor without breaking stride. Her helmet hung loose now, the strap dangling. A few personnel crossed her path, each stepping slightly to the side without being told. They didn't speak, but they didn't look away. She passed the ready room. The door was open. A group of pilots sat inside, shoulder to shoulder, eyes on a secondary monitor. The feed mirrored the main display, a slowed replay of her final low pass through the canyon. No one laughed. No one filled the space with commentary. When she moved past, one of them stood halfway, as if to say something, then didn't. She kept walking. Her boots tracked dust into the quarters hall, where the concrete floor bore years of scuff and oil. At the far end, her bunk sat unchanged. No nameplate, no marker, just a cot, a shelf, and the soft whir of an oscillating fan. She reached down, unclipped the gloves from her belt, and placed them on the edge of the mattress. Not draped, not thrown, just placed. Outside, the flight roster for the next cycle had been posted. A younger pilot, early 20s, still in his flame-retardant liner, stopped mid-stride to read it. His finger scanned down the list. The top slot no longer held Mason's name. It held hers. Dune Trace. He blinked, checked again, then stepped back. He didn't say anything, but he stood there for another minute, reading it a second time. The fan in Jessie's room turned once more, steady and slow. Her shoulders dropped slightly as she sat on the edge of the bed. The lights in the hallway dimmed on timer. In the Tactical Operations Center, the playback still sat frozen. The shape of her aircraft carved a line through the canyon, its wings steady, the angle precise. No one touched the controls. No one moved to resume. She didn't ask for the mission. She didn't wait for permission. She simply flew. And now, no one doubted who had turned back. She was never chosen for the spotlight, never praised for her silence, and never expected to return when others turned away. But when the moment came, she did not hesitate. She flew back into danger, not for orders or recognition, but because it was right. And in doing so, she redefined what strength looks like. Not loud, not visible, just consistent, capable, and committed. Her story is a reminder that value is not always announced. Sometimes it waits steady and unshaken until the world can finally see what was always there. If her journey made you pause, we invite you to reflect. What does real strength look like to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories resonate, consider following for more true accounts of quiet courage and those who serve without needing to be seen.